yourselves at home. This Russian author reading series by the fire. Today we'll be taking a look at chapter 21 in War and Peace, and chapter 2 and part 3 of Crime and Punishment. Thank you all for following this series. Without further ado, let's dive in. Going to start. Here we go. The wind had fallen, and black clouds merging with the powder smoke hung low over the field of battle on the horizon. It was growing dark, and the glow of two conflagrations was the more conspicuous. The cannonade was dying down, but the rattle of musketry behind and on the right sounded oftener and nearer. As soon as Tushin with his guns continually driving around or coming upon wounded men was out of range of fire and had descended into the dip, he was met by some of the staff, among them the staff officer and Zurkov, who had been twice sent to Tushin's battery but had never reached it. Interrupting one another, Interrupting one another, they all gave and transmitted orders as to how to proceed, reprimanding and reproaching him. Tushin gave no orders, and silently, fearing to speak because at every word he felt ready to weep without knowing why, rode behind on his artillery nag. Though the orders were to abandon the wounded, many of them dragged themselves after troops and begged for seats on the gun carriages. They're like, "I'm not dead. I'm not dead. Take me with you." The jaunty infantry officer who just before the battle had rushed out of Tushin's wattle shed was laid, with a bullet in his stomach, on Matveyevna's carriage. At the foot of the hill, a pale hussar cadet, supporting one hand with the other, came to Tushin and asked for a seat. "Captain, for God's sake, I've hurt my arm," he said timidly. "For God's sake, I can't walk. For God's sake. For God's sake, for God's sake." That's how war goes. I mean, sometimes you lose an arm, sometimes you lose a leg, sometimes you lose it all. It was plain that this cadet had already repeatedly asked for a lift and been refused. He asked in a hesitating, piteous voice, "Tell them to give me a seat for God's sake." "Give him a seat," said Tushin. "Lay a cloak for him to sit on, lad," he said, addressing his favorite soldier. "And where is the wounded officer?" "He has been set down. He died," replied someone. "Help him up. Sit down, dear fellow, sit down." "Spread out the cloak, Antonov." The cadet was Rostov. With one hand he supported the other. He was pale and his jaw trembled, shivering feverishly. He was placed on Matveyevna, the gun from which they had removed the dead officer. The cloak they spread under him was wet with blood which stained his breeches and arm. "What, are you wounded, my lad?" said Tushin, approaching the gun on which Rostov sat. "No, it's a sprain." "Then what is this blood on the gun carriage?" inquired Tushin. "It was the officer, your honor, stained it," answered the artilleryman, wiping away the blood with his coat sleeve as if apologizing for the state of his gun. It was all that they could do to get the guns up the rise, aided by the infantry. Having reached the village of Gruntersdorf, they halted. It had grown so dark that one could not distinguish the uniforms 10 paces off. The firing had begun to subside. Suddenly nearby on the right, shouting and firing were again heard. Flashes of shot gleamed in the darkness. This was the last French attack, and was met by soldiers, which sheltered in the village houses. They all rushed out of the village again, but Tushin's guns could not move, and the artillerymen, Tushin and the cadet, exchanged silent glances as they awaited their fate. The firing died down, and soldiers, talking eagerly, streamed out of a side street. "Not hurt, Petrov?" asked one. "Not hurt, Petrov," in Russian. We've given it 'em hot, mate. They won't make another push now," said another. "You couldn't see a thing. Had they shot at their own fellows? Nothing could be seen. Pitch dark, brother. Isn't there something to drink? The French had been repulsed for the last time, and once and again, in the complete darkness, Tushin's guns moved forward, surrounded by humming infantry as by a frame. In the darkness, it seemed as though a gloomy, unseen river was flowing always in one direction, humming with whispers and talk and sound of hoofs and wheels. Amid the general rumble, the groans and voices of the wounded were more distinctly heard than any other sound in the darkness of the night. The gloom that enveloped that army was filled with their groans, which seemed to melt into one with the darkness of the night. After a while, the moving mass became agitated. Some rode past on a white horse followed by his suite, and said something in passing. What did he say? Where to now? Halt, is it? Did he thank us? Came eager questions from all sides. Yeah, war is a gruesome thing. There is speculation that the U.S. may go to war with China, but if that day will ever come, who knows? China does have nukes. So any threat of war carries also with it the threat of nuclear apocalypse or something along those lines. Did he thank us? Came eager questions from all sides. The whole moving mass began pressing closer together, and a report spread that they were ordered to halt. Evidently those in front had halted. All remained where they were in the middle of the muddy road. Fires were lighted and the talk became more audible. Captain Tushin, having given orders to his company, sent a soldier to find a dressing station or a doctor for the cadet, and sat down by a bonfire the soldiers had kindled on the road. Rostov too dragged himself to the fire. From pain, cold, and damp, a feverish shivering shook his whole body. Drowsiness was irresistibly mastering him, but he kept awake by an excruciating pain in his arm, for which he could find no satisfactory position. He kept closing his eyes and then again looking at the fire, which seemed to him dazzlingly red, and at the feeble, round-shouldered figure of Tushin, who was sitting cross-legged like a Turk beside him. Tushin's large, kind, intelligent eyes were fixed with sympathy and commiseration on Rostov, who saw that Tushin, with his whole heart, wished to help him but could not. From all sides were heard the footsteps and talk of the infantry, who were walking, driving past, and settling down all around. The sound of voices, the tramping feet, the horses' hooves moving in mud, the crackling of wood fires near and afar, merged into one tremulous rumble. It was no longer, as before, a dark, unseen river flowing through the gloom, but a dark sea swelling and gradually subsiding after a storm. Rostov looked at and listened listlessly to what passed before and round him. An infantryman came to the fire, squatted on his heels, held his hands to the blaze, and turned away his face. You don't mind, Your Honor? He asked Tushin. I've lost my company, Your Honor. I don't know where, such bad luck. But the soldier and infantry officer with a bandage sheet came up to the bonfire, and addressing Tushin, asked him to have the guns moved a trifle to let a wagon go past. After he'd gone, two soldiers rushed to the campfire. They were quarreling and fighting desperately, each trying to snatch from the other a boot they were both holding onto. You picked it up? I dare say, you're very smart, one of them shouted hoarsely. Then a thin, pale soldier, his neck bandaged with blood-stained leg band, came up in angry tones and asked the artilleryman for water. Must one die like a dog? Said he. Tushin told them to give the man some water. Then a cheerful soldier ran up, begging a little fire for the infantry. A nice little hot torch for the infantry. Good luck to you, my fellow countrymen. Thanks for the fire. We'll return it with interest, said he, carrying away into the darkness a glowing stick. Next came four soldiers, carrying something heavy on a cloak, and passed by the fire. One of them stumbled. Who the devil has put the logs on the road? Snarled he. He's dead. Why carry him? Said another. Shut up. And they disappeared into the darkness with their load. Still aching? Tushin asked Rostov in a whisper. Yes. Your Honor, you're wanted by the general. He's in the hut here, said a gunner, coming up to Tushin. Coming, friend. Tushin rose, unbuttoning his greatcoat and pulling it straight, walked away from the fire. Not far from the artillery campfire, in a hut that had been prepared for him, Prince Bagration sat at dinner, talking with some commanding officers who'd gathered at his quarters. The little old man with the half-closed eyes was there greedily gnawing a mutton bone, and a general who had served blamelessly for 22 years, flushed by a glass of vodka and the dinner, and the staff officer with the signet ring, and Zherkov, uneasily glancing at them all, and Prince Andrew, pale with compressed lips and feverishly glittering eyes. In a corner of the hut stood a standard captured from the French, and the accountant with the naive face was feeling its texture, shaking his head in perplexity. Perhaps because the banner really interested him. Perhaps because it was hard for him, hungry as he was, to look on at a dinner where there was no place for him. In the next hut, there was a French colonel who had been taken prisoner by our dragoons. Our officers were flocking in to look at him. Prince Bagration was thanking the individual commanders and inquiring into details of the action and our losses. Yet this was a bloody battle for the Russians. The general whose regiment had been inspected at Brunel was informing the prince that as soon as the action began, he had withdrawn from the wood. Mustered the men who were woodcutting and following and allowing the French to pass him, had made a bayonet charge with 2 battalions and had broken up the French troops. When I saw, Your Excellency, that the 1st Battalion was disorganized, I stopped in the road and thought, I'll let them come on and we'll meet them with the fire of the whole battalion. And that's what I did. The general had so wished to do this, and was so sorry he had not managed to do it, that it seemed to him as if it had really happened. Perhaps it might really have been so. Could one possibly make out amid all that confusion what did or did not happen? By the way, Your Excellency, I should inform you, he continued, remembering Dólokhov's conversation with Kutuzov and his last interview with the gentleman ranker, that Private Dólokhov, who was reduced to the ranks, took a French officer prisoner in my presence and particularly distinguished himself. There's a lot of glory farmers and clout farmers on the battlefield. Prince Andrew mummy. Like everyone's trying to look their best. I saw the Pavlograd hussars attack there, Your Excellency, chimed in Zherkov, looking uneasily around. He had not seen the hussars all that day, but had heard about them from an infantry officer. They broke up 2 squares, Your Excellency. Several of those present smiled at Zherkov's words, expecting one of his usual jokes, but noticing that what he was saying redounded to the glory of our arms and of the day's work. They assumed a serious expression. Many of them knew that what he was saying was a lie devoid of any foundation. Kind of like a politician. A lot of it's morale, too. Prince Bagration turned to the old colonel. Gentlemen, I thank you all. All arms have behaved heroically, infantry, cavalry, and artillery. How was it that 2 guns were abandoned in the center? He inquired, searching with his eyes for someone. Prince Bagration did not ask about the guns on the left flank. He knew that all the guns there had been abandoned at the very beginning of the action. I think I sent you, he added, turning to the staff officer on duty. One was damaged, answered the staff officer, and the other I can't understand. I was there all the time giving orders and had only just left. It is true that it was hot there, he added modestly. Someone mentioned that Captain Tushin was bivouacking close to the village and had already been sent for. Bivouacking. Bivouacking. It means to stay in a temporary camp without cover. Okay. Oh, but you were there? Said Prince Bagration, addressing Prince Andrew. Of course, we only just miss one another, said the staff officer with a smile to Bolkonsky. I had not the pleasure of seeing you, said Prince Andrew, abruptly and coldly. All were silent. Tushin appeared at the threshold and made his way timidly from behind the backs of the generals. As he stepped past the generals in the crowded hut, feeling embarrassed as he always was by the sight of his superiors, he did not notice the staff of the banner and stumbled over it. Several of those present laughed. How was it a gun was abandoned? Asked Bagration, frowning. Not so much as at the captain as at those who were laughing, among whom Zherkov laughed loudest. Only now, when he was confronted by the stern authorities, did his guilt and the disgrace of having lost 2 guns and yet remaining alive present themselves to Tushin in all their horror. Yeah, I don't know. He had been so excited that he had not thought about it until that moment. The officer's laughter confused him still more. He stood before Bagration with his lower jaw trembling and was hardly able to mutter. I don't know, Your Excellency. I had no men, Your Excellency. It's like, I lost... It reminds me of that Simpsons episode with Principal Skinner. It's like that elephant ate my entire platoon. You lost your entire platoon, huh, Tushin? Sucks, that's the horror of the battlefield. You might have taken some from the covering troops. Tushin did not say that there were no covering troops, though that was perfectly true. He was afraid of getting some other officer into trouble and silently fixed his eyes on Bagration as a schoolboy whose blunder looks at an examiner. Like, he doesn't want to get anyone else in trouble. He's like, it was bad, sir. Really, really bad. The silence lasted some time. Prince Bagration, apparently not wishing to be severe, found nothing to say. The others did not venture to intervene. Most of these princes, by the way, will never see the battlefield. They're like, yes, and how was that battle that we were engaged in? Yes. Rich folk. Prince Andrew looked at Tushin from under his brows, and his fingers twitched nervously. Your Excellency, Prince Andrew broke the silence with his abrupt voice. You were pleased to send me to Captain Tushin's battery. I went there and found 2/3 of the men and horses knocked out, 2 guns smashed, and no supports at all. Prince Bagration and Tushin looked with equal intentness at Bolkonsky, who spoke with suppressed agitation. And, if Your Excellency will allow me to express my opinion, he continued, we owe today's success chiefly to the action of that battery, and the heroic endurance of Captain Tushin and his company, and without awaiting a reply, Prince Andrew rose and left the table. Prince Bagration looked at Tushin, evidently reluctant to show distrust in Bolkonsky's emphatic opinion, yet not feeling able fully to credit it, bent his head and told Tushin that he could go. Prince Andrew went out with him. Thank you, you saved me, my dear fellow, said Tushin. Prince Andrew gave him a look, but said nothing and went away. He felt sad and depressed. It was all so strange, so unlike what he had hoped. Who are they? Why are they here? Why are they here? What do they want? And when will all this end? Thought Rostov, looking at the changing shadows before him. The pain in his arm became more and more intense. Irresistible drowsiness overpowered him. Red rings danced before his eyes, and the impression of those voices and faces and a sense of loneliness merged with the physical pain. It was they, these soldiers, wounded and unwounded. It was they who were crushing, weighing down, and twisting the sinews, and scorching the flesh of his sprained arm and shoulder. To rid himself of them, he closed his eyes. Yeah, and I have no idea what the medical situation was like out there, but back in those days, probably not great. If you got injured, you're probably done for. For a moment he dozed, but in that short interval innumerable things appeared to him in a dream. His mother and her large white hand, Sonia's thin little shoulders, Natasha's eyes and laughter, Denisov with his voice and mustache. I miss Denisov. And Telyanin and all that affair with Telyanin and Bogdanich. The missing wallet? That affair was the same as this soldier with the harsh voice, and it was that affair and this soldier that were so agonizingly, incessantly pulling and pressing his arm and always dragging in one direction. He tried to get away from them, but they would not for an instant let his shoulder move a hair's breadth. It would not ache. It would be well if only they did not pull it, but it was impossible to get rid of them. He opened his eyes and looked up. The black canopy of night hung less than a yard above the glow of the charcoal. Flakes of falling snow were fluttering in that light. Tushin had not returned. The doctor had not come. He was alone now, except for a soldier who was sitting naked at the other side of the fire, warming his thin yellow body. Nobody wants me, thought Rostov. I can relate. There's no one to help me or pity me. Yet I was once, at home, strong, happy, and loved. He sighed, and doing so groaned involuntarily. Is anything hurting you? Asked the soldier, shaking his shirt out over the fire. Not waiting for an answer, he gave a grunt and added, What a lot of men have been crippled today. Frightful. Rostov did not listen to the soldier. He looked at the snowflakes fluttering above the fire and remembered a Russian winter at his warm, bright home, his fluffy fur coat, his quickly gliding sleigh, his healthy body, and all the affection and care of his family. And why did I come here, he wondered. I'm sure that thought has passed through many a soldier's head at one point or another. What the heck am I doing here? How did I get into this mess? Next day, the French army did not renew their attack, and the remnant of Bagration's detachment was reunited to Kutuzov's army. Okay, next time we start with Book 3, 1805. And we're 15% of the way through. Dang. Like at the rate this is going, we're going to complete Crime and Punishment probably around the time that we're about 30%. Maybe about 40% of the way through War and Peace, we'll have completed Crime and Punishment. Speaking of which, let's take a look in Chapter 2 of Part 3. Last time, as we might recall, Razzmahn was hitting on Raskolnikov's sister in a drunken stupor. Razzmahn waked up next morning at 8 o'clock, troubled and serious. And Raskolnikov, much like he usually is like, everyone just go. Get out of my sight. I want to be alone. He found himself confronted with many new and unlooked-for perplexities. He never expected that he would ever wake up feeling like that. He remembered every detail of the previous day, and he knew that a perfectly novel experience had befallen him, that he had received an impression unlike anything he had known before. At the same time, he recognized clearly that the dream which had fired his imagination was hopelessly unattainable. So unattainable that he felt positively ashamed of it, and he hastened to pass to the other more practical cares and difficulties bequeathed him by that thrice accursed yesterday. The most awful recollection of the previous day was the way he had shown himself base and mean, not only because he had been drunk, but because he had taken advantage of the young girl's position to abuse her fiancé in his stupid jealousy, knowing nothing of their mutual relations and obligations, and next to nothing of the man himself. And what right had he to criticize him in that hasty and unguarded manner? Who had asked for his opinion? Was it thinkable that such a creature as Avdotya Romanovna would be marrying an unworthy man for money? So there must be something in him. Peter Petrovich, he doesn't just seem rich, he also seems educated. Like he seems like a gentleman. His character is significantly different from Raskolnikov, and I would say Razzmahn. He's not antisocial, obnoxious, or drunk. So Peter Petrovich is like very different from the other Russians. Was it thinkable that, she'd go for him if he were unworthy? The lodgings. But after all, how could he know the character of the lodgings? He was furnishing a flat. Phoo, how despicable it all was. And what justification was it that he was drunk? Such a stupid excuse was even more degrading. And wine is truth, and the truth had all come out. That is, all the uncleanness of his coarse and envious heart. Would such a dream ever be permissible to him, Razzmahn? What was he besides such a girl, he, the drunken, noisy braggart of last night? Was it possible to imagine so absurd and cynical a juxtaposition? Razzmahn blushed desperately at the very idea, and suddenly the recollection forced itself vividly upon him of how he had said last night on the stairs that the landlady would be jealous of Avdotya Romanovna. That was simply intolerable. He brought his fist down heavily on the kitchen stove, hurt his hand, and sent one of the bricks flying. Of course, he muttered to himself a minute later with a feeling of self-abasement. Self-abasement means the belittling or humiliation of oneself. Self-deprecating, I guess, is another way of saying it. Of course, all these infamies can never be wiped out or smoothed over, so it's useless even to think of it. I think Rasmuhen is definitely self-aware. I'd say sometimes more so than others. And I must go to them in silence and do my duty. In silence too, and not ask forgiveness, and say nothing, for all is lost now. Sometimes he just plows ahead. But other times he's reflective, like we're seeing here. And yet as he dressed, he examined his attire more carefully than usual. He hadn't another suit. If he had, perhaps he wouldn't have put it on. I would have made a point of not putting it on. But in any case, he could not remain a cynic and a dirty sloven. He had no right to offend the feelings of others, especially when they were in need of his assistance and asking him to see them. He brushed his clothes carefully. His linen was always decent. In that respect, he was especially clean. He washed that morning scrupulously. He got some soap from Nastasia. He washed his hair, his neck, and especially his hands. When it came to the question whether to shave his stubby chin or not, Praskovia Pavlovna had capital razors that had been left by her late husband. The question was angrily answered in the negative. Let it stay as it is. What if they think that I have shaved on purpose to? They certainly would think so, not on any account. And the worst of it was he was so coarse, so dirty. He had the manners of a pothouse, and in even admitting that he had some of the essentials of a gentleman. What was there in that to be proud of? Everyone ought to be a gentleman, and more than that. And all the same, he remembered, he too had done little things. Not exactly dishonest, and yet, and what thoughts he sometimes had. Him. And to set all that beside, Avdotya Romanovna. Confound it, so be it. Well, he'd make a point then of being dirty, greasy, pothouse in his manners, and you wouldn't care. He'd be worse. He was engaged in such monologues when Zosimov, who had spent the night in Praskovia Pavlovna's parlor, came in. I believe Zosimov is the doctor, if I'm not mistaken. They were checking in on Raskolnikov to make sure he was okay or something. Raskolnikov has really weird bouts of sickness, where it's hard to tell if it's he's physically sick or just depressed or something like that. People have to keep checking on him and make sure he's okay, kind of thing. He was going home and was in a hurry to look at the invalid first. Razzmahn informed him that Raskolnikov was sleeping like a dormouse. Zosimov gave orders that they shouldn't wake him and promised to see him again about 11. If he's still at home, he added. Damn it all. If one can't control one's patients, how is one to cure them? Do you know whether he will go to them or whether they will come here? Whether they are coming here. They are coming, I think, said Razzmahn, understanding the object of the question. And they will discuss their family affairs, no doubt. I'll be off. You, as the doctor, have more right to be here than I. But I am not a father confessor. I shall come and go away. I have plenty to do besides looking after them. One thing worries me, interposed Rasmuhen, frowning. On the way home, I talked a lot of drunken nonsense to him. All sorts of things. And amongst them that you were afraid that he might become insane. You told the lady so, too. I know, it was stupid. You may beat me if you like. Do you think so seriously? That's nonsense, I tell you. How could I think it seriously? You yourself described him as a monomaniac when you fetched me to him. We added fuel to the fire yesterday. You did, that is, with your story about the painter. It was a nice conversation, and he was perhaps mad on that very point. If only I had known what had happened then at the police station, and that some wretch had insulted him with this suspicion. I I would not have allowed that conversation yesterday. These monomaniacs will make a mountain out of a molehill, and see their fancies as solid realities. As far as I remember, it was Zamatov's story that cleared up half the mystery to my mind. Why, I know one case in which a hypochondriac, a man of 40, cut the throat of a little boy of 8 because he couldn't endure the jokes he made every day at table. And in the case, I don't know why it's important he's a hypochondriac, but okay. And in this case, his rags, the insolent police officer, the fever, and this suspicion. All that working upon a man half frantic with hypochondria, with his morbid exceptional vanity. That may well have been the starting point of illness. Well, bother it all. By the way, that Zamatov certainly is a nice fellow, but, he shouldn't have told all that last night. He's an awful chatterbox. Yeah, he ain't the only he's not the only one. But whom did he tell it to? You and me. And Porphyry. What does it matter? I think probably the least talkative person is Sonia. Marmaladov's daughter. Yeah. And by the way, have you any influence on them, his mother and sister? Tell them to be more careful with him today. They'll get on all right, Razzmahn answered reluctantly. They'll get on all right, he answered reluctantly. Why is he so set against this Luzhin, a man with money, and she doesn't seem to dislike him? Let me see, what is Luzhin? I think it's another name for Peter Petrovich. I think so, it's not defining it. Luzhin. I see, his full name is Peter Petrovich Luzhin. So, yeah, they're calling him by his last name when they call him that. A man with money, and she doesn't seem to dislike him. And they haven't a farthing, I suppose, huh? But what business is it of yours? Rasmuhen cried with annoyance. How can I tell whether they've a farthing? Ask them yourself, and perhaps you'll find out. Phew, what an ass you are sometimes. Last night's wine has not gone off yet. Goodbye. Thank your Praskovia Pavlovna from me for my night's lodging. She locked herself in, made no reply to my bonjour through the door. She was up at 7 o'clock. The samovar was taken into her from the kitchen. I was not vouchsafed a personal interview. At 9 o'clock precisely, Razzmahn reached lodgings at Bakaleyev's house. Both ladies were waiting for him with nervous impatience. They had risen at 7 o'clock or earlier. He entered looking as black as night, bowed awkwardly, and was at once furious with himself for it. He had reckoned without his host. Pulcheria Alexandrovna fairly rushed at him, seized him by both hands, and was almost kissing them. He glanced timidly at Avdotya Romanovna, but her proud countenance wore at that moment an expression of such gratitude and friendliness, such complete and unlooked-for respect, in place of the sneering looks and ill-disguised contempt he had expected, that it threw him into greater confusion than if he had been met with abuse. Fortunately, there was a subject for conversation, and he made haste to snatch at it. Yeah, I'm actually pretty surprised. Hearing that everything was going well and that Rodya had not yet waked. Pulcheria Alexandrovna declared that she was glad to hear it, because she had something which it was very, very necessary to talk over beforehand. Razzmahn's one of those characters who does like random favors for people. Some people would call those kinds of people like goody-goodies. Like, he brought Raskolnikov clothes without him asking when he was like in a partial coma. He told Raskolnikov's mom, he's like, okay, you both just wait here. We'll go check on Raskolnikov for you so we don't upset him. He's just a guy who just does good deeds. and is sometimes overbearing. Maybe that's the reason why she's pleased to see him. Hearing that everything was going well and that Roja had not yet waked, Pulcheria Alexandrovna declared that she was glad to hear it because she had something which was very, very necessary to talk over beforehand. Then followed an inquiry about breakfast and an invitation to have it with them. They waited to have it with him. Avdotya Romanovna rang the bell. It was answered by a ragged, dirty waiter. They asked him to bring tea, which was served at last, but in such a dirty and disorderly way that the ladies were ashamed. Razzmahn vigorously attacked the lodgings, but remembering Luzhin, stopped in embarrassment and was greatly relieved by Pulcheria Alexandrovna's questions, which showered in a continual stream upon him. He talked for 3/4 of an hour, being constantly interrupted by their questions, and succeeded in describing to them all the most important facts that he knew of the last year of Raskolnikov's life, concluding with a circumstantial account of his illness. He omitted, however, many things which were better omitted, including the scene at the police station with all its consequences. They listened. I think Razzmahn still does not know that Raskolnikov was involved in that double murder. Like some stuff he just does not know. They listened eagerly to his story. When he thought that he had finished and satisfied his listeners, he found that they considered he had hardly begun. Tell me, what do you think? Excuse me, I still don't know your name, Pulcheria Alexandrovna put in hastily. Dmitri Prokofitch. Is he given a fake name? I don't know. Maybe it's someone else. I should like very, very much to know Dmitri Prokofitch, how he looks. On things in general now, that is, how can I explain? What are his likes and dislikes? Is he always so irritable? Tell me if you can. What are his hopes, and so to say his dreams? Under what influences is he now? In a word, I should like. Ah, mother, how can he answer all that at once? Observed Dunya. Good heavens, I had not expected to find him in the least like this, Dmitri Prokofitch. Well, you apparently don't know your son very well, then. and it has only been 3 years since they've seen each other last. So people, I feel like they don't change that much. Naturally, answered Razzmahn, I have no mother, but my uncle comes... Razzmahn, you definitely have a mom. Even if she died, you still have a mom. But he says, I have no mother, but my uncle comes every year, and almost every time he can scarcely recognize me, even in appearance, though he is a clever man, and your 3-year separation means a great deal. What am I to tell you? I have known Rodyan for a year and a half. He's morose, gloomy, proud, and haughty, and of late, and perhaps for a long time before, he's been suspicious and fanciful. He has a noble nature and a kind heart. He does not like showing his feelings and would rather do a cruel thing than open his heart freely. Sometimes, though, he is not at all morbid, but simply cold and inhumanly callous. It's as though he were alternating between two characters. Sometimes he is fearfully reserved. He says he is so busy that everything is a hindrance, and yet he lies in bed doing nothing. He doesn't endure things, not because he hasn't the wit, but as though he hadn't time to waste on such trifles. He never listens to what is said to him. He's never interested in what interests other people at any given moment. He thinks very highly of himself, and perhaps he's right. But what more? I think your arrival will have a most beneficial influence upon him. Raskolnikov's dad died. So yeah, it's just his mom and sister now. God granted may, cried Pulcheria Alexandrovna, distressed by Razzmahn's account of her Rodya. And Razzmahn ventured to look more boldly at Avdotya Romanovna at last. He glanced at her often while he was talking, but only for a moment, and looked away again at once. Avdotya Romanovna sat at the table, listening attentively, then got up again and began walking to and fro with her arms folded and her lips compressed, occasionally putting in a question, without stopping her walk. She had the same habit of not listening to what was said. She was wearing a dress of thin, dark stuff and had a white transparent scarf around her neck. Razzmahn soon detected signs of extreme poverty in their belongings. Had Avdotya Romanovna been dressed like a queen, he felt that he would not be afraid of her, but perhaps just because she was poorly dressed, and that he noticed all the misery of her surroundings, his heart was filled with dread, and he began to be afraid of every word he uttered, every gesture he made, which was very trying for a man who already felt diffident. He's not afraid of the poor. Diffident is modest or shy because of a lack of self-confidence. Diffident youth. You've told us a great deal that is interesting about my brother's character, and have told it impartially. I'm glad. Thought that you were too uncritically devoted to him, observed Avdotya Romanovna with a smile. Think you're right that he needs a woman's care, she added thoughtfully. I didn't say so, but I dare say that you're right. Only, what? He loves no one, and perhaps he never will, Rasmuhen declared decisively. You mean he's not capable of love? Do you know, Avdotya Romanovna, that you are awfully like your brother, in everything indeed, he blurted out suddenly to his own surprise. But remembering at once what he had just before said of her brother, he turned as red as a crab and was overcome with confusion. Avdotya Romanovna couldn't help laughing when she looked at him. You may both be mistaken about Rodya, Pulcheria Alexandrovna remarked, slightly piqued. I am not talking of our present difficulty, Dunya. What Peter Petrovitch writes in his letter, and what you and I have supposed may be mistaken, but you can't imagine Dmitri Prokofitch. Yeah, maybe he gave him a fake name, or maybe he's Dmitri Prokofitch Razzmahn, I don't know. And maybe it's just his full name. I don't know. How moody, and so to say capricious he is. I never could depend on what he would do when he was only 15. And I'm sure that he might do something now that nobody else would think of doing. Well, for instance, do you know how a year and a half ago he astounded me and gave me a shock that nearly killed me when he had the idea of marrying that girl? What was her name? His landlady's daughter? Also something we have in common, except in my case it was the landlord. Did you hear about that affair? Asked Avdotya Romanovna. Do you suppose, Pulcheria Alexandrovna continued warmly, do you suppose that my tears, my entreaties, my illness, my possible death from grief or poverty would have made him pause? No, he would calmly have disregarded all obstacles. And yet it isn't that he doesn't love us. He's never spoken a word of that affair to me, Rasmuhen answered cautiously. But I did hear something from Praskovia Pavlovna herself, though she is by no means a gossip, and what I heard certainly was rather strange. And what did you hear? Both ladies asked at once. Again, I think Leo and Fyodor do this sometimes, where it's like hive mind effect. Where it's like not even like people are completing each other's sentences. Like everyone just says the same thing at once. That is not how people are. Like unless they're creepy twins, like no one has that kind of link. It's like they'd say the exact same thing at the same time. Even completing each other's sentences is like, I think that's pretty rare. Yeah, both of them asked at once. Well, nothing very special. I only learned that the marriage, which only failed to take place through the girl's death, was not at all to Praskovia Pavlovna's liking. They say, too, the girl was not at all pretty. In fact, I am told positively ugly, and such an invalid and queer, but she seems to have had some good qualities. She must have had some good qualities, or it's quite inexplicable. She had no money either, and he wouldn't have considered her money. But it's always difficult to judge in such matters. I'm sure she was a good girl, Avdotya Romanovna observed briefly. God forgive me, I simply rejoiced at her death, though I don't know which of them would have caused most misery to the other, he to her or she to him, Pulcheria Alexandrovna concluded. Okay, that's a weird thing to say, but okay. Then she began tentatively questioning him about the scene on the previous day with Luzhin, hesitating and continually glancing at Dunya, obviously to the latter's annoyance. I don't even think that they've met. Well, they have met him, but they haven't met him since going to Petersburg. This incident, more than all the rest, evidently caused her uneasiness, even consternation. Razzmahn described it in detail again, but this time he added his own conclusions. He openly blamed Raskolnikov for intentionally insulting Peter Petrovich, not seeking to excuse him on the score of his illness. Well, the dude did show up randomly at his house. And he was opposed to his sister's marriage to this guy from the get-go. Like, he's not like this guy at all from the get. So, somewhat expected. He had planned it before his illness, he added. I think so too, Pulcheria Alexandrovna agreed with a dejected air. But she was very much surprised at hearing Razzmahn express himself so carefully and even with a certain respect about Peter Petrovich. Avdotya Romanovna too was struck by it. So this is your opinion of Peter Petrovich? Pulcheria Alexandrovna could not resist asking. I can have no other opinion of your daughter's future husband, Razzmahn answered firmly and with warmth. And I don't say it simply from vulgar politeness, but simply because Avdotya Romanovna has, of her own free will, deigned to accept this man. If I spoke so rudely of him last night, it was because I was disgustingly drunk. And mad besides. Yes, mad, crazy, I lost my head completely. This morning I'm ashamed of it. I'm pretty sure Razzmahn had a house party at the time too. I don't know what that was. Like, he was having a house party and he wasn't even there. Crimson and C speaking. Avdotya Romanovna flushed, but did not break the silence. She had not uttered a word from the moment they began to speak of Luzhin. Without her support, Pulcheria Alexandrovna obviously did not know what to do. At last, faltering and continually glancing at her daughter, she confessed that she was exceedingly worried by one circumstance. You see, Dmitri Prokofitch, she began. I'll be perfectly open with Dmitri Prokofitch, Dunya. Of course, mother, said Avdotya Romanovna, emphatically. This is what it is, she began in haste, as though the permission to speak of her trouble lifted a weight off her mind. Very early this morning, we got a note from Peter Petrovich in reply to our letter announcing our arrival. He promised to meet us at the station, you know. Instead of that, he sent a servant to bring us the address of these lodgings and to show us the way. He sent a message that he would be here himself this morning. But this morning, this note came from him. You better read it yourself. There's one point in it which worries me very much. You'll soon see what that is. And tell me your candid opinion, Dmitri Prokofitch. You know Rodya's character better than anyone, and no one can advise us better than you can. Is he calling it all off because of Raskolnikov? Maybe. Dunya, I must tell you, made her decision at once, but I still don't feel sure how to act, and I've been waiting for your opinion. Razzmahn opened the note, which was dated the previous evening, and read as follows. Dear Madam, Pulcheria Alexandrovna, I have the honor to inform you that owing to unforeseen obstacles, I was rendered unable to meet you at the railway station. I sent a very competent person with the same object in view. I likewise shall be deprived of the honor of an interview with you tomorrow morning by business in this Senate that does not admit of delay, and also that I may not intrude on your family circle while you're meeting your son, and Avdotya Romanovna, her brother. I shall have the honor of visiting you and paying you my respects at your lodgings no later than tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock precisely. Herewith I venture to present my earnest, and I may add imperative request that Rodyan Romanovich may not be present at our interview. Romanovich. As he offered me a gross and unprecedented affront on the occasion of my visit to him in his illness yesterday. Moreover, since I desire from you personally an indispensable and circumstantial explanation upon a certain point, in regard to which I wish to learn your own interpretation, I have the honor to inform you in anticipation that if, in spite of my request, I meet Rodyan Romanovich, I shall be compelled to withdraw immediately, and then you have only yourself to blame. I run on the assumption that Rodyan Romanovich his name is Raskolnikov, dude, who appeared so ill at my visit, suddenly recovered 2 hours later, and so, being able to leave the house, may visit you also. I was confirmed in that belief by the testimony of my own eyes in the lodging of a drunken man who was run over and has since died, to whose daughter, a young woman of notorious behavior, he gave 25 rubles on the pretext of the funeral, which greatly surprised me, knowing what pains you were at to raise that sum. Herewith expressing my special respect to your estimable daughter, Avdotya Romanovna, I beg you to accept the respectful homage of your humble servant, P. Illusion. What am I to do now, Dmitri Prokofitch? Began Pulcheria Alexandrovna, almost weeping. How can I ask Rodya not to come? Yesterday he insisted so earnestly on refusing Peter Petrovitch, and now we are ordered not to receive Rodya. He will come on purpose if he knows, and what will happen then? So there's two different lines of reasoning here. One is blood is thicker than water, family comes first. To heck with Peter Petrovitch, or whatever his name is. And the other line of reasoning is, if it's meant to be, it'll be. If, like, Peter Petrovitch is meant to be with Avdotya, then, you know, it shouldn't really matter what Raskolnikov thinks or says. But, who knows? He will come on purpose if he knows, and what will happen then? Act on Avdotya Romanovna's decision, Razzmahn answered calmly at once. Yeah, pretty much. Ball's in her court. Oh dear me, she says, goodness knows what she says. She doesn't explain her object. She says that it would be best, at least, not that it would be best, but that it's absolutely necessary that Rodya should make a point of being here at 8 o'clock, and that they must meet. I didn't want even to show him the letter, but to prevent him from coming by some stratagem with your help. Because he is so irritable, because I don't understand about that drunkard who died and that daughter, and how he could have given the daughter all the money, which cost you such sacrifice, mother. Put in Avdotya Romanovna. Yeah, Marmalade. Who died. I'm not exactly sure how Peter Petrovitch knows about that. Maybe he heard about it or saw something about it. I really don't know. Which cost you such sacrifice. He was not himself yesterday, Rasmuhen said thoughtfully. If only you knew what he was up to. In a restaurant yesterday. Though there was sense in it too. He did say something as we were going home yesterday evening about a dead man and a girl. But I didn't understand a word. But last night, I myself. The best thing, mother, would be for us to go to him ourselves, and there I assure you we shall see at once what's to be done. Besides, it's getting late. Good heavens, it's past 10, she cried, looking at a splendid gold enameled watch which hung around her neck on a thin Venetian chain. It looked to come entirely out of keeping with the rest of her dress. A present from her fiancé, thought Razzmahn. Yeah, it seems like... Yeah, Peter Petrovitch is just a rich dude. and like no one else is rich over here. We must start, Dunya. We must start, her mother cried in a flutter. It's hard to say too, like, is Avdotya going to get with him for his money or because she actually cares about him? I think that's the number one reason why I would hate to get rich, because I would always be wondering what, you know, my lady's real motive and intention was. I'm sure rappers, like famous people, think about that all the time. Like, does she want me for me, or is it just my money? No, I ain't saying she a gold digger. You must start, her mother cried in a flutter. We'll be thinking we are still angry after yesterday from our coming so late. Merciful heavens. While she said this, she was hurriedly putting on her hat and mantle. Dunya, too, put on her things. Her gloves, as Razzmahn noticed, were not merely shabby, but had holes in them. Yet this evident poverty gave the two ladies an air of special dignity, which is always found in people who know how to wear poor clothes. Rasmuhen looked reverently at Dunya and felt proud of escorting her. What are they called? Simps. The queen who mended her stockings in prison, he thought, must have looked then every inch a queen, and even more a queen than at sumptuous banquets and levees. My God, exclaimed Pulcheria Alexandrovna. Little did I think that I should ever fear seeing my son, my darling Rodya. I'm afraid, Dmitri Prokofitch, she added, glancing at him timidly. Don't be afraid, Mother, said Junia, kissing her. Better have faith in him. Oh dear, I have faith in him, but I haven't slept all night, exclaimed the poor woman. They came out into the street. Do you know, Junia, when I dozed a little this morning, I dreamed of Marfa Petrovna. She was all in white. She came up to me, took my hand, and shook her head at me, but so sternly as though she were blaming me. Is that a good omen? Oh dear me, you don't know, Dmitri Prokofitch, that Marfa Petrovna's dead. Who's that? I don't know. Okay, very next page. No, I didn't know. Who's Marfa Petrovna? She died suddenly, and only fancy. Afterwards, Mama put in Dunya. He doesn't know who Marfa Petrovna is, and neither do I. For that record. You don't know? I was thinking that you knew all about us. Forgive me, Dmitri Prokofitch. I don't know what I'm thinking about these last few days. I look upon you really as a providence for us, and so I took it for granted that you knew all about us. I look on you as a relation. Don't be angry with me for saying so. Dear me, what's the matter with your right hand? Have you knocked it? Yes, I bruised it, muttered Razzmahn, overjoyed. Okay. I sometimes speak too much from the heart, so that Dunya finds fault with me, but dear me, what a cupboard he lives in. I wonder whether he's awake. Does this woman, his landlady, consider it a room? Listen, you say that he does not like to show his feelings, so perhaps I shall annoy him with my weaknesses? Do advise me, Dmitri Prokofitch. How am I to treat him? I feel quite distracted, you know. Don't question him too much about anything if you see him frown. Don't ask him too much about his health. He doesn't like that. Dmitri Prokofitch, how hard it is to be a mother. But here are the stairs. What an awful staircase. Mother, you're quite pale. Don't distress yourself, darling, said Dunya, caressing her. And with flashing eyes she added, he ought to be happy at seeing you, and you are tormenting yourself so. Wait, I'll peep in and see whether he has waked up. The ladies slowly followed Razzmahn, who went on before, and when they reached the landlady's door on the fourth story, they noticed that her door was a tiny crack open, and that two keen black eyes were watching them from the darkness within. When their eyes met, the door was suddenly shut with such a slam that Pulcheria Alexandrovna almost cried out. Gotta love Raskolnikov. I'm still wondering when he's gonna get arrested for those murders. Like, cops are gonna come arrest him any minute. Killing that pawnbroker lady. Okay, that was the Russian author series. Hope you enjoyed this edition. I'll be back with today's fitness and exercise stream. I'm thinking with maybe some new exercises to showcase, so stay tuned. Thank you for